While Donald Trump was busy on Truth Social threatening to slap 35% tariffs on Canadian maple syrup and calling their Prime Minister weak, something absolutely devastating was happening in Brussels that nobody in Washington saw coming. On December 1, 2025, Canada pulled off what intelligence sources are calling the most humiliating strategic betrayal in modern American history. And according to leaked Pentagon communications obtained exclusively by sources familiar with the matter, senior defense officials had zero clue this was happening until European media broke the story. This isn't about hurt feelings or diplomatic protocol. This is about $244 billion in European defense contracts that American companies just got completely locked out of. This is about Canada quietly outmaneuvering the most powerful military on Earth, while Trump was tweeting about making them the 51st state. And by the time you understand what just happened, you'll realize exactly how catastrophically Trump's America First strategy just backfired. Here's what went down behind closed doors. The European Union has been building something called SAFE, Security Action for Europe. Think of it as Europe's insurance policy against depending on American military protection forever. We're talking about 150 billion euros, roughly 244 billion Canadian, in low-interest defense loans designed to finance massive industrial-scale weapons production. This isn't symbolic investment or political theater. This is real money meant to buy missiles, ammunition, drones, artillery systems, air defense networks, advanced cyber warfare capabilities, and space technology. European leaders looked at Russia's ongoing aggression, looked at Trump's constant threats to abandon NATO allies, and decided they couldn't afford to keep their security entirely in American hands. SAFE is the financial engine designed to make Europe militarily self-sufficient by 2030. And here's where it gets absolutely stunning. SAFE was designed exclusively for European Union member states. Nobody else gets access. The United Kingdom tried to join after Brexit and got rejected completely. Australia lobbied hard for membership and didn't even make it to serious negotiations. Even the United States, Europe's supposed indispensable partner and the world's largest military superpower, remains totally outside this framework. But Canada just became the first and only non-European country ever admitted into this exclusive defense club. Let that reality sink in for a moment. In the most significant European military initiative since NATO was created, the only outside nation with full access is Canada. Not America, not Britain, not Japan or South Korea. Canada. And the timing is absolutely devastating for Trump. While he was publicly humiliating Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, calling Canada a security threat and promising to destroy their economy with tariffs, Carney was in Brussels quietly negotiating access to $244 billion in defense contracts that American companies are now completely shut out of. To understand why this represents such a catastrophic strategic failure, you need to know where Canada was before this happened. For decades, more than 70% of Canadian defense spending flowed straight to American companies. Canadian manufacturers built components for American weapon systems. Canadian military procurement followed American standards and specifications. The entire defense ecosystem north of the border revolved around one gravitational center, Washington, D.C. Canada was essentially trapped in a single supplier relationship for almost everything related to national security, which meant they had zero leverage and zero alternatives when the relationship went toxic. And then Trump made absolutely sure the relationship went toxic. He spent his first term and now his second term treating Canada like an enemy state. 25% tariffs on Canadian lumber and steel. Threats to completely shut down their automobile industry. Public humiliation of Canadian leaders at G7 summits. And then in July 2025, after Canada supported Palestinian statehood at the United Nations, Trump escalated to threatening 35% tariffs on literally everything. This wasn't normal trade negotiation or diplomatic pressure. This was economic warfare against America's largest trading partner, closest military ally, and literal next-door neighbor. But here's what Trump and his team completely missed while they were busy playing hardball. In January 2025, Justin Trudeau announced he was resigning as Prime Minister. The Liberal Party was polling 26 points behind Conservatives and looked headed for complete electoral collapse. And then Mark Carney entered the leadership race. This wasn't some career politician looking for power. Carney was the former governor of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, one of the most respected financial minds on the planet. Someone who understood exactly how to navigate complex international negotiations without creating unnecessary drama. He won the Liberal leadership with an overwhelming 85.9% of the vote in March 2025 and immediately became Prime Minister with a very clear message. Canada needed to stop being completely dependent on one unpredictable partner who treated allies like hostages. 3 months later, in June 2025, Carney quietly signed a security and defense partnership with the European Union. Most American analysts dismissed it as standard diplomatic protocol, the kind of symbolic agreement leaders sign for photo opportunities that never amounts to anything substantial. But that agreement was actually the foundation for something much bigger. It laid the legal and diplomatic groundwork for Canada to formally apply for membership in SAFE. And by December 2025, just 6 months after that initial partnership, the deal was completely finalized. Canada secured full membership and complete access to $244 billion in European defense financing. According to sources close to the negotiations, the European Commission fast-tracked Canada's application specifically because they wanted a reliable North American partner who wouldn't threaten them with tariffs every time there was a policy disagreement. So what exactly does Canada get out of this arrangement? And more importantly, what did the United States just lose forever? First, Canadian defense companies now have direct access to compete for $150 billion worth of defense projects across 27 European countries. That's not just export opportunities or occasional contracts. That's full integration into the core European defense supply chain for the next several decades. When Poland needs anti-aircraft missiles, when Germany needs surveillance drones, when France needs ammunition production, Canadian companies can now bid on those contracts with nearly equal footing to European firms. American defense contractors completely shut out. Second, and this is where it gets even more damaging for us interests, Canada negotiated special exemptions from the normal rules that typically block outside suppliers. Under standard SAFE guidelines, joint defense projects require at least 65% of components to be produced within EU member states. That's a massive protectionist barrier designed to keep non-European suppliers out of the market. But according to European Commission sources who spoke on condition of anonymity, Canada secured unprecedented exemptions allowing Canadian firms to contribute up to 80% of a system's total value in specific high-demand categories. We're talking about drones, counter-drone systems, missile components, ammunition production, advanced sensors, and cyber capabilities. These are exactly the areas where American companies have traditionally dominated global markets. Canada just got preferential access, while the United States stands on the outside looking in. Third, Canadian companies can now access the same low-interest EU-backed financing that European defense firms use. The European Union borrows money on global markets using its A credit rating, which means they get incredibly favorable interest rates. They then lend those funds to participating governments essentially at cost. This isn't just about cheaper money. This creates predictable long-term production schedules that allow Canadian manufacturers to invest in new facilities, hire thousands of workers, and build industrial capacity that typically takes decades to develop. All of that economic activity that would have potentially gone to American defense contractors is now flowing to Canada and Europe instead. And there's absolutely nothing Washington can do about it, because the deal is already signed and ratified. But here's what makes this betrayal even more devastating for American power. This deal sends an unmistakable message to the rest of the world about who Europe considers a reliable partner. The European Union, representing 27 democracies and the world's second largest economy, looked around for a trustworthy ally to help build its defense industrial base and chose Canada over literally everyone else. They didn't pick Australia, even though it's part of the Five Eyes intelligence alliance with America. They didn't pick Japan or South Korea, even though both are major American allies with advanced defense industries. They picked Canada, and they did it specifically because Canadian leaders have proven they don't weaponize trade relationships for political leverage, don't impose surprise tariffs to score domestic political points, and don't threaten to abandon security commitments after elections. The implications for American strategic dominance are absolutely staggering. For the entire post-World War II era, the Western alliance system has been built around one central assumption: American security guarantees are indispensable. European countries underfunded their militaries for decades because they assumed the United States would always protect them. Canada did the same thing. But what happens when that American security guarantee starts looking unreliable? What happens when the President of the United States openly questions whether NATO allies are worth defending, threatens close partners with economic warfare, and suggests annexing neighboring countries? European leaders watched 4 years of Trump's first term, saw him get re-elected, and decided they couldn't afford to depend entirely on Washington anymore. That's exactly why they created SAFE. That's why they're rapidly rearming. And that's precisely why they invited Canada to join them instead of America. Now Canada has something it's never had before: options. For decades, when the United States threatened Canada economically, Canadian leaders had no choice but to negotiate from a position of complete weakness because there were no alternatives. But now when Trump threatens 35% tariffs or suggests Canada should become America's 51st state, Canadian officials can point to Brussels and say we have other partners who actually value strategic relationships over domination. The deal is done. Official ratification of Canada's SAFE participation is expected within weeks, which means Canadian companies will start competing for European defense contracts by early 2026. The European Union has set a target of being fully prepared for any military threat by 2030, which means the next 5 years will see an absolute explosion of defense spending across the continent. We're talking about over $1 trillion in total defense investments when you combine SAFE loans, national budgets, and broader European rearmament initiatives. And the United States, completely on the outside, not because Europe or Canada are hostile to American interests, but because Donald Trump spent years treating allies like enemies, weaponizing trade relationships, and making it crystal clear that American commitments can't be trusted. But the most shocking part: according to intelligence sources, this is just the beginning. Several other countries are now quietly exploring similar arrangements with Europe, specifically to reduce their dependence on American defense systems. Australia is reportedly in preliminary discussions about observer status in SAFE. New Zealand has sent trade delegations to Brussels 3 times since Canada's announcement. Even traditionally pro-American allies like South Korea and Japan are suddenly asking European defense contractors about partnership opportunities. This could be the moment historians look back on as when America's post-war alliance system started completely unraveling, and the economic consequences are already starting to materialize. Lockheed Martin's stock dropped 3.2% the day after the Canada deal was announced. Raytheon is facing questions from investors about potential revenue losses from European markets. Boeing's defense division is reportedly conducting emergency assessments of how much business they could lose if more allies follow Canada's example. But here's what makes this betrayal even more personally devastating for Trump. Mark Carney played this perfectly. While Trump was busy making threats and demands, Carney was building relationships. While Trump was alienating allies, Carney was positioning Canada as the reliable alternative. While Trump was tweeting insults, Carney was signing contracts worth hundreds of billions of dollars. The man who built his political brand on being the world's greatest dealmaker just got completely outmaneuvered by a Canadian banker. And the worst part? Trump still doesn't seem to understand what happened. His latest Truth Social posts are still focused on threatening more tariffs, as if economic threats will somehow undo a deal that's already been signed and ratified by 27 European parliaments. According to Pentagon sources who spoke on Backfired, there's genuine panic in defense circles about what this means for American military-industrial dominance. For decades, the United States has maintained technological and industrial superiority partly because allies had no choice but to buy American systems. That created massive economies of scale, steady revenue streams, and continuous innovation funding. But if Canada can successfully integrate with European defense production, and if other allies follow suit, then American companies lose those guaranteed markets. Smaller production runs mean higher costs. Higher costs mean less competitive products. Less competitive products mean fewer exports. It's a death spiral that could fundamentally undermine American military technological leadership within a decade. The timing couldn't be worse for American interests. China is already pushing hard to export defense technology to developing nations. Russia, despite sanctions, still supplies weapons to numerous countries. And now Europe is building its own alternative ecosystem with Canada as the first non-European partner. The United States is going from being the only game in town to being one option among many. And in some categories, they might not even be the best option anymore. But perhaps the most damaging aspect of this entire debacle is what it reveals about American credibility. When your closest ally, your biggest trading partner, and your next-door neighbor decides that partnering with Europe is safer than relying on you, that sends an unmistakable signal to every other country in the world. American partnerships come with risks. American commitments can't be trusted. American leaders might decide to treat you like an enemy tomorrow, regardless of how loyal you've been in the past. The deal is done. The contracts are signed. The factories are being planned. And there's absolutely nothing Washington can do to stop it. Canada just proved that America isn't indispensable anymore. The question now is how many other allies are going to reach the same conclusion, and what's left of American global leadership when they do. This is what happens when you mistake bullying for negotiation. This is the cost of turning allies into adversaries. And this is just the beginning of the consequences America will pay for electing a president who treats diplomacy like a reality TV show.